Warning! This episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that did make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisnieks. Listeners, I am absolutely over the moon right now because I am getting to introduce you, if you somehow don't already know her, to Aliette de Bodard. Aliette, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I have been a fan of your work for a long time, I will say at this point. I don't know how many years, who knows, time is fake. And I was super thrilled when you said that you would come on to talk about navigational entanglements.
This is me being like all flushed and wanting to dive under a bed, which is my normal
Of course.
mind. And people say nice things. It's fine.
This is why I sit in the host chair most of the time, because when people want to talk to me about things, I turn extremely red.
Oh, so that's the trick. I'll give it some thought. Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. Listeners, if you have a genre podcast that you want to invite me on to see me get really flustered, please reach out, trunkcast@gmail.com. So before we get into this book, the novella Navigational Entanglements, which is out this very month, July, because that is the month that it is when you are hearing this, from TorDotCom Books, is there anything that we should know about this before we get into it?
So basically, I watched too much C drama and and I read too many associated books, and I really loved I mean, my favorite one personally is Heaven's Official Blessing, which hits all my buttons because it's got immortals, it's got like longing, it's got angst, and it's got, zombies and gods and immortals and demons. And so one of the things that I was really interested in was there's, the Xianxia genre also has an equivalent in Vietnamese, and I wondered what would happen if I took that and put it into space, basically.
Winning combination.
But, well, with the caveat, obviously, it's not an actual Sanxia book because, there's a lot of things that I change, and I wanted this to be primarily a science fiction book, and also I'm not an expert, so, it's more kind of like inspiration rather than read this and this is what you're gonna get. But the idea was that there were navigators. You had this system of clans that was basically space navigators, and they can open gates so they can travel really fast between point A to point B. So obviously they have a stranglehold on commerce, because on trade, right? Because this is what people would do. And obviously the actual empire, which is watching this, is like, sorry, but no, we kind of don't agree with that. So you've got very tense politics. But all of this is mostly taking place in the background, because from the point of view of the main characters of this book, they are two juniors from the clans, the kind of like, shall we say politely, screw-ups that no one really wants to claim, and they get sent on this quote-unquote very important mission with two other juniors that they can't stand, and oversight from an imperial person that they can't stand either, to locate this very dangerous thing that has escaped from between the gates. That's called a Tangler. It's kind of giant space jellyfish. Jellyfish are fascinating, by the way.
So cool.
And so so cool. I learned so many things about jellyfish when I was researching this book. And only about, 5% of it actually made it into the book, and all of which is
Sure,
actually
yeah.
true. Except since it's in space, and obviously, it's a giant jellyfish because we're talking spaceship size, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. And so the idea is that when their Imperial Minder dies, all of a sudden they have a space jellyfish that's loose and that could kill a lot of people, a murdered person, and it looks like one of them did the murder, otherwise it wouldn't be funny, right? And so they
Mm-hmm.
somehow have to solve all of these problems at the same time while bickering, trying not to kill each other. And for the two main characters, they totally have this under control. They are totally not falling in love. They can't afford to fall in love at a critical juncture like this. They are so doomed
Yeah.
in so many
Super,
ways.
super, super normal time. Nothing bad ever happens.
Yep, pretty
Yeah.
much. So there's, space chases, lots of snark, lots of longing, and everything goes sort of boom in multiple directions.
Yeah. Listeners, if this book was not on your radar and any of those things are your jam, let me just tell you, it's great. You should read this book as soon as it comes out. So with that all revealed, shall we get into the reading?
Yep, I am going to be very boring. I'm going to be reading from the beginning because I always find it's a good place to start.
I
And
mean,
also, any other point would involve a lot more explanations about the background. So, again, easy.
yeah, it gets, shall we say, tangled very quickly.
It does. I am actually. I wish I was the one who had come up with that title, but I didn't. It's all right. So, Tangler Chase. Uh, Viet Nhi had resigned herself early on to not liking people, and especially not people from the Navigator clans, which was more than a little unfortunate, as she was not just part of the Navigator clans, but a Rooster disciple so junior that anywhere everyone could order her into whatever fraught or difficult work needed to be done, and more often than not, said work included more contact with other clanspeople. To wit, her current situation. There's been a slight problem, Elder Monglios said. They were sitting in the reception hall of the Rooster Fortress. In the background was the Central Needle and a steady flow of spaceships rising, flashing golden for a moment as their navigators summoned their shadows to cocoon them, and then vanishing into the hollows, the space beyond the stars, beyond the void, where travel went faster than light. Ni liked being near the Needle. The dance of merchants, boarding, and ships lifting off was mesmerizing and a comfort, a reassurance that the world was going on, as it had always done. She focused on the teacup in her hand, feeling its warmth against her skin. What problem? She asked. An incident with a ship. One of ours? Elder Liu tightened her lips. A rat ship, she said. Ni tolerated Elder Liu. She didn't equivocate, got straight to the point. And the only secret she had that Ni could find was that before she'd retired from active challenges in the Void and Star circles, the Society of Navigators, always fighting each other for status, she'd loved a navigator and passed on some minor information to him. Insofar as dark inner secrets went, it was tolerable. She hadn't told that to Elder Liu, of course. Most people didn't appreciate being told all of the truth, and Ni couldn't always understand where the tipping point was between being honest and scaring off people. There were rules, but rules sometimes failed because people were too messy. We're not currently allied with the Rat Clan, Ni said, finally. She gripped her cup, finding solace in its smooth surface. No, Elder Liu said, but the Imperials intervene. She raised her hand. I know you hate politics, but the Empire has requested we investigate. All that Ni understood of the Empire was that it owned everything, and the merchants whose goods were transiting through the four major navigator clans owed allegiance to it. That was a good enough reason to say yes to whatever they suggested. And you want me to investigate. It made sense, because she was good at finding things out. No, Elder Yiru said. I want you to deal with a Tangler. That stopped her. A Tangler? There's a Tangler loose? Tanglers were large and tendril creatures whose natural habitat was the hollows. The space navigators took ships to, the space that enabled fast space travel. In the natural state, Tanglers floated in the hollows, grabbing other hollows creatures and slowly digesting them. Unfortunately, this also included people traveling on ships, as Tanglers fed on cognition. Anyone human touched by their tendrils would gradually lose control over their own body, until death finally came as a mercy. And whenever a navigation gate was opened, there was a risk Tanglers would go back to normal space, where they would prey on people. A skillful navigator would use their shadow to fend off Tanglers, both during the navigation in the hollows and during the opening and closing of navigation gates. Clearly, something had gone wrong. Not just loose. Lost. Elder Leo's face was grim. It left the vicinity of the rat needle where the ship crashed, and it went somewhere. We've lost track of it. Somewhere. Ni gripped her cup. A tangler loose outside the hollows, where no one but the navigator clans could see them. Tendrils trailing through streets and habitats, snaring people and draining them slowly of everything that made them sentient. She wasn't particularly scared of Tanglers, but the idea offended her. Tanglers belonged in the hollows, not in the matter world. Who was the navigator? A rat, called Fan Bian Dun Ang. Ninth judge, he said. She couldn't place him, which meant she probably hadn't spent any extended period of time with him. I see your knowledge of clan business is still in parallel, Elder Liu. It wasn't sarcasm, merely a statement of fact. She understood how Ni worked. Well, Ni said, still clutching her cup, this ninth judge wasn't very good at what he was doing. His shadow should have protected the ship. This was, after all, what shadows were for. It didn't. And what about the protection at the needle? This failed too. These are serious failures. You said the Tangler went somewhere. Into Imperial space? Ni asked. A shrug from Elder Liu. I don't know, she said, but yes, that's the suspicion. Clans control their own fortress and ancestral needles, and the lesser needles and associated spaceports in their own network. The Empire controlled the rest. I'm not the best person for this, she said. Low laughter from Elder Liu. And coming from you, it's not false humility, is it? Just a statement of fact. Nia was flagging. This conversation was too unpredictable, and her small reserves of energy was starting to get depleted. She summoned her shadow, felt it rise, trembling, from her vitality center, and spread through her meridians, a warm, global flow of power, like being under heavy rocks, a grip that held and comforted her. Her full shadow would be golden wings and thick veils of energy. Ni styled the heavenly wave, was ponderous and powerful, unlike Elder Liu's own more aggressive blood-extinguishing palm. I advise you to send someone else, Ni said. A grimace from Elder Liu, which Ni knew was bad news. It meant whatever she asked for wasn't convenient. I don't have someone else. She paused, and again that grimace on her face. Ni gripped her shadow more tightly. The Empire has asked for a delegation of major clans. They are annoyed with us. They want the Tangler caught before more death could occur. Ni could understand that. She'd be annoyed, too, if something so large had gone wrong. But still, Elder. You'll be our delegate, Elder Liu said, firmly. Meanwhile, we'll be investigating the matter of the crash with the other elders from the major clans. I'd rather do this, Ni said, knowing already that it was pointless. I'm afraid we don't always do the things we like, Elder Liu said smoothly, slowly. Insofar as Ni was concerned, she never got to do the things she liked. Too much noise, too many people, and she'd much rather stay in the Rooster Fortress cultivating, but the way things were structured there made it extremely hard. She was meant to go out and make a name for herself, to grow old without being killed by some other clan's navigator, whether major or minor, to prove herself. And knowing far too much about people didn't help with that. What the clans respected was defeating other navigators and transporting Lao's ships safely, but to do the latter, one had to first do the former. Elder Liu said, I believe the other clans send people you'll be familiar with. That means you should be able to work together. Ni tried to smile. It was probably coming off as insincere, but Elder Liu respected the attempt rather than the content. I'll go, she said. Good, Elder Liu said. The Imperial envoy, Li Chao, is arriving at the Rooster Needle. You can go and wait for her with the others. The others were already here. Ni felt a brief moment of panic. Things were happening too fast, too uncontrollably. She released her shadow, feeling the loss of security keenly, and tried to look forward to the mission. An utter failure. This was dangerous, and had far too much uncertainty. And worse, it had people. Not just any people. Ni was gonna have to put up with her peers.
Oh, I was, at the end of that chapter, I was so on board. Ni hits very close to my heart in a lot of her preferences for quiet and calm and predictability. And I did not love for her that she was forced out of that. I loved for me observing her being forced out of that.
Oh yeah, it was a yes. What's the worst thing that could happen to the character? Oh, more people
Yeah.
that she doesn't know.
That she doesn't know. Yes. Yeah. Oh, a delight. Absolutely a delight. So, this, of course, is Tales from the Trunk. So, is there anything that, through the course of writing and editing this book, that just never made it to the final cut that you are super sad and want our listeners to know about?
Uh, well, I think part of what I'm always sad about when I'm writing something like this is that I have like pages and pages and pages of world building. So I had like
Mm-hmm.
all these very detailed things about like how the different clans operated, where the different like fortresses were, and I had like this entire wall where I like stuck things
Mm-hmm.
and all like and every clan had a different kind of like overall mood, a different kind of motto, and so on and so forth, and
Mm-hmm.
like maybe like 5% of that made it into the narrative.
Yeah.
uh and even then that's very optimistic. So we
Mm-hmm.
never there were more secondary characters that we never did really get to see, and I feel, they were in the outline. Like, I feel sad, but also I recognize that, I already had four different main characters,
Mm-hmm.
plus, a dead body, plus, right? And I just couldn't keep adding on and on and on and on people, right? And they
Of
had
course.
relatives and so on and so forth. And I was like, yeah, okay, no, this is supposed to be a novella, sort of. It did not end up as a novella. Spoilers. It's like a novel by barely like 2,000 words, but it's like actually a novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is a hefty novella.
Yeah, yeah, but like all, I guess like I was trying to reach for that Xianxia mood, and they always have this very complex hierarchy, and I'm like, okay, no, actually, I don't have that space. Like you can have that
Mm-hmm.
space if you've got a 5 volume or
Yeah.
like a 52 episode series. I have a book, a very small
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. If you have like a Brandon Sanderson size book, maybe.
Yes, alas, not everyone can be Brandon Sanderson, and
Yeah.
I had been specifically contracted for novella. So when I turned it in, I was like, "Hey, don't look at the word count. You love me, right?"
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a mood in terms of like all the world building and like you said about the research about the jellyfish, all the research that goes into it, and then
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And
most of
obviously
it you
there were
just
lots
have
of
to throw
things
out.
about the jellyfish, the reproductive cycle, like what kind of jellyfish were we dealing with exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I went to my eldest and I was like, "So can I borrow your big book on jellyfish?" And he was like, "Oh, sure, you're gonna put jellyfish in your next book." And he was very upset. And he was like, "The cover does not have a jellyfish on it. This is a crime. Where is my jellyfish?"
I mean, valid. Like,
Valid, valid, valid.
I mean, on the other hand, it is a very good cover.
No, it is a very good cover, but I understand his disappointment that, his mommy came specifically to borrow the big book on jellyfish and then no
Mm-hmm.
jellyfish were forthcoming
Yeah.
anywhere, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we've talked obviously a bunch about sort of the events of the book in broad strokes. I'm wondering if there are any bits without getting too far into spoilers that you are just so excited for our listeners to get to when they read it.
Uh, well, I mean, part of the challenge of this was that I kind of wanted to write about a neurodivergent character.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I wanted to write about, which is the part I have more experience with, is like the main character having a sensory overwhelm. And
Mm-hmm.
so and make that part of the romance. So I was like, okay, we're gonna write that scene and it has to come at precisely the right moment in between the bits about the space jellyfish. And I thought it was gonna be a challenge, but in the end, nobody even remarked on it or anything. So I was
I
like, okay, fine.
loved that
Uh,
scene.
and yeah, but I thought somebody was going to complain about, it doesn't
Hmm.
happen. And I was like, it totally does. Never mind. So yeah, it's one of those things that I wouldn't say it's fun. It's not a fun
Hmm.
experience, but I thought in terms of like getting the two main characters to like get very close and very vulnerable and very upfront with each other, I think it's a scene that does what I really wanted it to do.
Yeah, that is. And also, without going into too many specifics, that was very relatable, uh, very relatable scene, and made me very, very happy. Isn't quite the right word, but seen certainly.
Yep. Yep. Well, I'm glad.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's definitely one of those things where it becomes not becomes. What am I trying to say? This was one of those books where I immediately, within the first page, felt so seen by the main character, by the narrative, in a way that I really like having those experiences more. I remember having a similar experience reading Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus last year, and that same sort of like, you know, oh, they're just like me. They have all this stuff happening in their brains.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that worked. It was kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, very. It was a thing.
So a couple of final questions. One, is there anything aside from this book, obviously, is there anything that you have either recently out or forthcoming that you'd like our listeners to get excited for?
So I have a story forthcoming, and I want that Twink obliterated by Bonner Books, which is called, let's see, what did it end up being called? The ship, the healer, and the assassin, I think. And it should be out around Worldcon, and it's about two two disaster gays on a spaceship, and then things get worse.
Perfect.
And the ship itself, well, the ship themselves is a kind of Lovecraftian horror
Love
that
this.
is trying to be nice to humans, but doesn't really know how it works.
Sure, yeah.
Doesn't
Oh,
understand when they start gibbering all of a sudden.
well, count me as excited for that, certainly.
Oh,
Finally.
The
Oh, yeah.
Tutelary, the healer, and the assassin is what the title ended up being.
Okay,
I am
great.
terrible at titles. People change them for me all the time.
Listen, if I could get somebody else to do titles for me.
What are friends for? Oh,
Uh
wait,
huh.
not that.
I got. I think Sarah Gailey and or Sarah Hollowell helped me get the title for this show down initially. So
It's a great title.
yeah, I'm super happy about it. I think it does what it
Yeah.
says on the cover.
Mm-mm-mm.
Finally, before we get going, and I know this is sometimes the hardest question, is there anything in the broader media landscape that you've been enjoying that you'd love our listeners to know about?
Let's see. What have I been enjoying lately? Let's see. Um, well, I mean, it's not very original, but I've been enjoying Dead Boys Detective quite a lot. Because it just, I think I actually read The Sandman when I was 17 or 18, so it was in that very formative period, and I have this fondness for the TV series in the way that, it's a thing I read at a very like formative time for me, but I don't actually. I love the universe. I don't actually love the main plot as much as I want to, right? Whereas Dead Boys Detective is more relatable for me, right? I mean, as much and I know that's deliberate, right? Dream is meant to be this kind of very distant asshole. It's very hard for
Yeah.
me to read a thing in which the main character is actually a very distant asshole, right?
Yeah.
So whereas Dead Boys Detective is a show with like lots of fun and sympathetic characters, and some of them happen to be ghosts, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's the Cat King, which is just chef's kiss, right? So
Yeah.
so I really, really like that. And then, again, not very original, but I read The Saint of Bright's Door by Vajra. Oh, damn, I can never remember his actual full name. Oof.
I'm also drawing a blank, so I unfortunately cannot help here.
Chandrasekera.
Ah, that's right.
Chandrasekera. Which I was blown away by. It does such great world building, and it does that very sly thing with narrative as well, which I found super interesting. Where you get
Mm-hmm.
almost to the end, and without spoilers, you go, "Oh, oh, well, so that's why all those weird things were happening while the narrative was going on." Oh, okay. So no, it was really great, and then I'm catching up on my Chronicles of Elantra by Michel Sagara, which is my kind of comfort blanket read.
Oh yeah.
So I've been saving them because at some point there will not be any more, and I will have to keep bugging Michel about, when can I see the next one? So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
what I've been mostly doing.
Fabulous. Finally, Aliette, before we get going, where can our listeners find you elsewhere?
Sure. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram as Aliette DB. My main thing right now is Blue Sky. I'm on a bit of a writing hiatus, so my Blue Sky currently is lots of tea, fountain pens, and various squeeing about various media that I'm consuming.
That's what
Um,
that's what Blue Sky is for.
Yes, exactly. And my Instagram is mostly watercolors and pictures of food. And apparently, I should do more pictures of food because these get a lot of views. And my website is at https://www.aliettebodard.com. That's where you can find the link to my newsletter, which is free, and my Patreon, which has some of the aforementioned recipes for the cooking. And again, this is by far my most successful tire. I also have a tire where I publish, like, bits and pieces of my work before it actually gets seen by anyone else. But
Mm-hmm.
apparently, what people really want is the recipes.
Yeah.
So, a word to the wise.
Fabulous. Well, links to those, of course, will be in the show notes. Aliette, it has been such a delight having you on. Thank you so much once again for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a great fun. It was great fun.
Absolutely. Listeners, stick around in 2 weeks when we'll have a super cool guest. I don't know who it is yet, but they're going to be awesome. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Blue Sky at Trunkcast, and I post at HBBisnieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.